Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, back with some more pre-season FPL content ahead of the 24-25 season. As always, if you're able to like, share or subscribe, that will be greatly appreciated. And if you've enjoyed my FPL pre-season content and you also want to buy me a coffee, feel free to do so. The pinned message under the YouTube video has more information. Right then, so you've seen me do multiple mock drafts of late. You've also seen me do my own updated drafts. But in this video, I actually wanted to call out 15 players that I believe are flying under the radar. And it's not to say that they're must-haves, far from it. But if you're looking for that differential in one of your positions with many of your slots already being taken, then these 15 are definitely worth considering. I'll give my reasons for each of them. So this isn't an actual mock draft or an updated draft. And as a ballpark figure, I'll say roughly 5%, give or take. Some might be slightly over. Many will be well under that 5% mark, but that's the ballpark that we're working with. So I'll start off with the goalkeepers, move to the defenders, midfielders, and the forwards for my 15 players that are flying under the radar ahead of the 24-25 season. So first and foremost, I'm going to go to the goalkeepers, and the player that comes to mind for me, who was in one of my mock drafts as well, is Nick Pope. Now, with Nick Pope, I feel he's been very unfortunate over the past year or so. And had things been different, let's say that Everton got relegated and Nick Pope actually wasn't injured and Newcastle had a very prolonged run in the Champions League, then he could have very easily have been England's number one at the Euros. And here he is, back fully recovered. And at 5.0 million, I'll put my hands up and say that he isn't someone who you'd automatically go for as a starting goalkeeper in FPL. Again, looking at the points per million concept, that you get more bang for your buck with a 4.5 goalkeeper. But with Nick Pope, if you want entry to Newcastle United's defence, especially with the fixtures that they've got at hand for the opening part of the season, then you've got to factor in which defender are you going to get. Because ultimately, when it comes to Newcastle United's defence, there are a lot of question marks. I know that at the start of the season, a lot of managers went for Dan Burn in their drafts, but just as a reminder of Newcastle's fixtures as well, they've got Southampton at home, Bournemouth away, they've got the Tottenham match, Wolves away, Fulham away, and then of course they've got Man City as well. So, and then further on, Everton and Brighton. So clearly, from attacking assets, absolutely, Gordon and Isak are in multiple FPL drafts, but I think there's definitely a case for a defensive asset as well. Dan Burn, like I've mentioned, there are question marks over him. Livramento, question marks over him as well. Trippier, for many, although he's 6 million, probably is a bit too much. But if you're looking for a goalkeeper and there aren't that many options at hand, then clearly Nick Pope is someone who is definitely worth considering, especially with the low ownership as well. And you've got the peace of mind that with Newcastle's team, that he is the least likeliest player to be rotated if he is fully fit. The next player, who I would argue should really be a starting goalkeeper for many FPL managers, in fact, who has a very low ownership, partly due to the fact he didn't play a full season during the 23-24 season, is Henderson. Now, Henderson's ownership at this moment in time is 5.4%. So clearly he is a differential. And with Crystal Palace, we saw how they finished in the second half of last season, especially after Hodgson left the club and under the new regime. The expectation with Crystal Palace is that hopefully there'll be some clean sheets in those opening games. As a reminder, with their fixtures, Brentford away, West Ham at home, Leicester at home, Everton away again, Forest. So if you want a 4.5 goalkeeper, there aren't really that many options. You probably won't go for one of the newly promoted ones. Unfortunately, Leno and Pickford are now £5 million. So the options are somewhat limited. And I would even argue that if you had a straightforward choice and you didn't want Newcastle United cover, then Henderson would be the go-to pick at 4.5 million. In fact, he is my goalkeeper in my actual draft right now. So definitely worth considering. And the indications are that he should start for Crystal Palace. Pope and Henderson are two goalkeepers that are definitely worth considering, that are very low owned. So on to the defenders now. And the first defender that comes to mind for me, that is definitely flying under the radar. In fact, I'll go for one that is actually very low owned, in fact. And I'm going to Brentford. And if you can guess who would I go for at Brentford, of course, they've got a few options here. You've got Pinnock, 4.5 million. You've got Henry, 4.5 million. It's actually Ben Mee. And I was actually surprised that Ben Mee's 4.5 million in FPL this season. So with him, he's clearly got like an attacking threat, as in when he comes up for goals. And I've seen a lot of managers go for Flecken as their goalkeeper this season. But with Ben Mee, he started the season at 23-24 at 5 million. He started many of the previous seasons at £5 million since he's been in FPL, just as you can see on screen there. Initially had a 4.5 million price in his earlier seasons going 10 years back, but he's been 5 million for the other seasons. And I kind of feel in some ways, dare I say it, he's actually underpriced by £500,000. He had 3 goal involvements last season. He had 5 the season before. And just as a reminder of Brentford's fixtures, the good thing here is that you don't have to start him in every game. That with Brentford, you can rotate game week 1, game week 3, and then bring him in again towards game week 6 and 7 and 9. So a lot of FPL managers will be using 4.5 million players for rotation this season due to the fact that the BPS system has changed. We're obviously going to spend a lot up top as well. And I've got no doubt that if you want to rotate a 4.5 million defender, and some say that Crystal Palace rotation sort of works with Brentford as well, that Ben Mee is someone who should definitely be considered at £4.5 million. There he is as one of the options that is definitely flying under the radar. The other defender that I wanted to call out, and I'm going to go to Crystal Palace again, that isn't really being talked up enough, probably because he's 0.5 million too much, arguably, but he has got the attacking prowess. Just bring him up here. And he was starting matches towards last season as well. There we go. It's Munoz. £5 million, 4.2%. And of course, at that price point, you'll say that, well, there's actually plenty of other defenders who are 4.5 million that are definitely worth considering instead. But the argument is with Munoz that you've got that attacking prowess as well. And that last season, he chipped in with 4 assists as well. 4 assists that came over the course of 1,440 minutes. 56 points scored. Of course, it was somewhat different in terms of the conditions that he started in, but clearly Crystal Palace took a positive turn in the second half of last season, as I've mentioned. So if you're looking to get an extra £500,000 out, let's just say you don't want to go for a Pedro Porro at 5.5 million due to clean sheet concerns with Spurs, and perhaps you want to rotate Munoz and Ben Mee, then he's definitely worth considering. And just as a reminder, I'll bring this planning fixture difficulty rating graphic up from FPL.team there. And as a reminder, if I just get up Brentford and Crystal Palace, let's just say you started Ben Mee in game week 1, game week 2, you had Munoz, game week 3, Ben Mee again, and then game week 4, you had Munoz again, and then, okay, game week 5 is a bit tricky. Game week 6, West Ham for Ben Mee again. and then Wolves again, and then let's say you're Nottingham Forest. So you've got a bit of rotation there. But I would argue that you've got enough defensive rotation for Munoz and Ben-Mee for up until you use your wild card. So again, I know it's a bit of a hard sell with him being $500,000 more, and of course you'd easily then look for another £4.5 million Crystal Palace defender such as Anderson, who obviously has a very good ownership. But if you're looking for one who's got that extra attacking prowess, then do consider Munoz. So on to our next defender, and recently won the Copa America as well, and is a World Cup winner for Manchester United. Martinez, 5% on the dot. Looking at those fixtures, Fulham at home, Brighton away, Southampton at home. So you'd fancy some clean sheet potential there as well for his opening fixtures. $4.5 million for a United defender, you can't really go wrong. So there we go. Martinez, Munoz, and me are the defenders picked so far. And the other defender that I'm going to call out, Manchester United defender, someone who eventually got some minutes in the Euros, effectively his pre-season, surprised he even played in the Euros. It's Luke Shaw, £5 million, less than 5% ownership. So if you were confident in backing a United player and you weren't too concerned about a player for the long term and you like the fixtures as well, then again, just a reminder, 3 of the 4 fixtures look reasonable, then Luke Shaw is definitely an option. On to the last defender that I feel that requires more consideration as well. I talked about Pedro Porro of Spurs, but there's another defender from Spurs who a lot of us did have, in fairness, last season, but I think due to injury and other reasons, is not emphasized as much in our teams, and also Spurs' lack of clean sheets. It's Udogie, £5 million, is $500,000 cheaper than Pedro Porro. And look at those opening games, 3 of the 5 look fairly reasonable. Leicester away, Everton at home, Brentford at home as well. So with Udogie, I think definitely worth considering as another option, especially with the fact that he's cheaper than Pedro Porro. So on to the midfielders now, and I'm going back to Manchester United, and a player who actually didn't even play in the Euros, very well, didn't have the best of form during 23-24. It's Marcus Rashford. Had a price drop of £2.5 million. He's £7 million this season. 3 of the opening 4 games look reasonable, as we mentioned with Martinez and Luke Shaw as well. The thing with Marcus Rashford in particular is that he's someone who seems to have one amazing season and then one not so amazing season, as you can see there, that especially from 2020, 2021, amazing season, had a lull the season after, a big boost the season after that, a lull again. And I'm backing him to definitely have more goal involvements during the 24-25 season. He'd want to hit the ground running. And if you're looking for a player in that 7 million category, who is there really? You've got like Nkunku, you've got Eze, who are the hot favourites right now. But with Marcus Rashford, if you're really looking for that uber differential with those reasonable fixtures, then he has to come into the thinking there ultimately. So there he is as one of the players picked. And moving on to the next player, let's go for another uber differential actually, someone who also didn't play at the Euros and would want to hit the ground running. If you can guess it, fair play to you. But I don't think many would guess. It's Jack Grealish. And Jack Grealish, 0.7% owned, okay, £6.5 million. But if you wanted entry to the Manchester City attack, there are question marks on whether he will start the season. It remains to be seen if that's the case. But just to remind you that the season before, he had 15 goal involvements, had a healthy number of minutes. Of course, minutes were very lacking last season. City won the league title, but he, just like Rashford, has a point to prove. And if he starts in the Community Shield, then perhaps there's a possibility that he will also start the opening game week as well. Let's see what happens there. Of course, you've got other players who come into the mix as well. There's talk of Alvarez potentially moving at the time of recording, Oscar Bob potentially starting as well. But if Grealish gets a start in the Community Shield, £6.5 million, and a reminder of Man City's opening games, of course, Chelsea is the opening fixture. You look at the remaining fixtures after that, 3 out of the next 4, Ipswich, West Ham, and Brentford. So on to the next pick now is a Brighton player as things stand. Very low ownership. Used to play for Newcastle United last season, but played in the Dutch tier last season and scored on loan 10 goals in 27 games. It's Minter, 0.8% ownership, as I mentioned. And then you look at the fixtures as well. He's got Ipswich and Forest in those opening 5 games, with Everton as well. Appears to be starting during pre-season. Good possibility that he actually will start game week 1 as well. But you look at the price point, £5.5 million, that if you're looking at that price bracket, who is there really? You've got Hudson-Odoi. But if you fancy someone beyond him who is a bit more of an unknown quantity, then Minter is that person. So on to the next midfielder, going to Aston Villa, another player who's actually been showing like his form during pre-season. There we go, Morgan Rogers. Looking at the fixtures, green block run of games with West Ham, Leicester, Everton, Wolves, and Ipswich in the opening 6, £5 million. Is he going to be a starter? Is he locked in? Is X-Min's an issue? Who knows? But his ownership right now in FPL is very reasonable, 6.8%, basically differential. So he's definitely one that also is worth factoring in. So on to the final midfielder now for the players that are flying under the radar. And I would say this one is definitely a bit more maverick in terms of the players that I've shown. And it remains to be seen if he will be a starter under the new manager and what position he'll play. But it's actually a Liverpool player. It's Harvey Elliott at £5.5 million. So we talked about that 5.5 million price bracket. There aren't many options, but look at those opening run of games. If Harvey Elliott is playing in a very advanced role, then you've got Ipswich away, Brentford, Forest, Bournemouth, Wolves in those opening 6 games. So definitely worth considering, especially let's just say you don't have Mohamed Salah, you're going for a no Salah draft, you've got Trent, and you want that Liverpool cover. And if there's a possibility that Harvey Elliott starts, then you've definitely got to factor him into your thinking there. So on to the forwards now. So I'm going to go to Nottingham Forest, and someone who actually had a very healthy amount of goal involvements last season. There we go. It's Wood. And Wood's proven time and time again what he's able to do in the Premier League. As a reminder, Chris Wood had remarkably managed to register 15 goal involvements last season. Season before and the season before that, it was somewhat lacking, but he's someone who has proven time and time again to be able to register at least double-digit goal involvement. And then you look at Forest's generous run of games as well, Bournemouth, Southampton, Wolves, Brighton and Fulham, that he's definitely one worth considering if you are going for a 3-4-3 formation. Arguably not for a 3-5-2, unless you've got a very heavy stacked midfield, but he's one to consider as a third option for forward. Is he an X-Men's issue? Possibly, but it remains to be seen. But if he is expected to start, then he's definitely one that is worth considering. So next player I'm going to go to, the penultimate pick of players flying under the radar. It's a Brentford player, And it's a forward. It's not Mbeumo. If I can find him there. There we go. It's Wissar. Now, Wissar is also £6 million. Fixtures are a bit more trickier than Wood. We'd expect him to be a starter. The question with him is that with Tony potentially no longer being at Brentford, will his X-Mins increase? And we saw Wissar last season as well. The number of goal involvements that he had was an increase from the previous season. He had 16 goal involvements in 23-24, 11 in 22-23, and 9 in 21-22. So his trajectory is more goal involvements. And if Tony isn't there, is he going to get more minutes, which potentially appears to be the case? And is he going to have more goal involvements? Potentially, yes. And I know that some FPL managers did have him in their drafts for 23-24 and benefited as well. But he's definitely one worth considering as well for 24-25. So on to the last player, forward, and it's a club that we've already covered, but he's not in enough FPL drafts at this moment in time. It's Richarlison, 1% owned at this moment in time in FPL. Very generous run of opening games with Leicester, Everton, and Brentford at home, as we can see there. And with Richarlison in particular, we know like his prowess and his capabilities as well, that X-Mins was a big issue for him last season. But look at the goal involvements. He's literally had 15 goal involvements for almost 1,500 minutes played. So you know with him that there's a chance of him being involved with a goal if he's got minutes, if he's fit, and if he's starting, and he's got a generous run of games. He's a no-nonsense pick, really. He's had 18 goal involvements, 16 goal involvements. That's the ballpark figure you're looking at with him. And especially with Spurs as well, it's an attacking team under Ange Postecoglou, that he's definitely going to be one player that will no doubt benefit if they're on form. So there you have it. Those are the 15 players who I believe are flying under the radar. I repeat, this is not a mock draft. This is not my own draft, but some players that I feel haven't been called out enough by the FPL content creators. Would I pick any of these players in my team? Well, I've technically have one of these players in my team right now, and I potentially could pick a few more depending on the formation that I pick as well. But it's something that is worth considering, that look, for every position, you're not going to get a differential for most of those positions, but at least for one of the positions, funds permitting, if you're looking for that extra edge, then by all means, you don't have to break the bank. You can get these differentials for bargain prices, essentially. But at the same time, you do want to align to the template as well. Keep it relatively safe at the start of the season if you're playing for overall rank in the long term, so that you have that in mind for the long haul. But if you want to really get an edge and potentially benefit from the upside, then these players that we've called out here are definitely worth considering. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Are these players that you'd potentially pick? Have you already got them in your drafts? And if you've got someone else that is a differential, who else should we consider? And as always, if you can like, share, and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. Or if you want to buy me a coffee, check out the pinned tweet under this video. Take care and all the best.